And we are, so the camera's there, everything's gonna be recorded and video.
Hello.
Hi, Mr. Myers, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. This is Ms. Thomas from the School District of Lee County. And we have started our EDAC meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're just gonna do this as a conference call then?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. As we set up we got our Google thing going, but, okay, let me put you on speaker then. Okay, hold on one second.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. So you want me to start?
No.
Just one moment, Mr. Myers.
Okay, sure.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first Equity and Diversity Advisory Committee meeting for the 2019-2020 school year. I'll introduce myself. I am Dennis Quisenberry III. I am last year's vice chair for the committee. I'm also a Lee County teacher, work at Lee Virtual School, and I have 4 kids, 3 of which who are in the Lee County schools, 1 graduate. And I'm excited to be here again this year. I'm excited to see the new faces. We're going to go around the room and introduce all of ourselves to each other so we know that who's here and learn a little bit about you. You at least say your name and where you're from, your connection to Lee County schools. Since you're closest to me, I'll start with you.
Carl Baxter, franchise business owner. Okay. Peter Diamwe, and I'm with the FGCU. I'm a visiting assistant professor at the College of Education. I'm also the president of the African Network of Southwest Florida. WF4. And about years now.
Chris Blakely, I currently serve as Assistant Dean of Students and Director of Multicultural Relations Development at Florida Gulf Coast University. Newer to the area, it's going into our second year here, and I have one child in Lee County School.
Hi, my name is Lubna Alam, and I'm new to the area too. I moved here 2 years ago from Wisconsin, and I was born in Pakistan. I'm a Muslim from my religion, and that's the reason why I joined this board.
Sean Williams, I'm a graduate of Lee County Schools like 28 years ago. So it's nice to be back in this capacity to see that we actually have equity and diversity baked into our school system. So I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
Trayvon Davis. I was born and raised in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm a graduate of Dunbar High School. I currently work at Oakhammock Middle School where I teach language arts as well as AVID. And I'm pleased to be here.
Hi, my name is Corey Bright Kerrigan. I am the Director of Disability Services and the ADA Coordinator at Florida Gulf Coast University, and I have 2 kids in the school.
Good evening, my name is Ken Burns, and I'm a recently retired administrator for the school district of Lee County, and this is my second year.
Hi, good evening. My name is Joanne Martinez. I'm a new resident of Cape Coral, and I'm looking forward to working with like-minded individuals in this committee. And I have 1 son in the Lee County School District. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cole Caruso. This is my 2nd year at EDAC, and I'm the CEO of Community Resource Network of Florida. And we are a local business here that provides supports and services to adults and children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I'm really passionate about making all of our communities a place that is inclusive for everybody so that people can live, work, and thrive and live the lives in which they want. So I'm really happy to be back, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Surely. Hi, my name is Guido Minaya. I'm
the former chair of EDAC last year. I was with EDAC for 4 years. Love this group. Love it, love it, love it. And my firm and I, Learning Global Solutions, we develop and deliver corporate training stuff for large companies.
Terrence Siler, I'm just visiting the community, seeing the notification online, so I forgot to stop in on the Dean of Students at Allen Park Elementary.
Yes.
My name is Carmen Lopez Negron, and I'm a guest. And I'm here to support, my daughter is Joanne Martinez. I'm here to show support to the room.
And I'm Green Dickinson, the chair of the school board. I'm here to meet the people I appointed personally. I've even just done the application, so I wanted to welcome them personally. And thank you for your support.
Hello, my name is LaTanya Thomas. I am the recording secretary. I'm also secretary to executive director. This is my second year on EDAC. I am not originally from Fort Myers, I'm from Miami, Florida.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Crystal Torres. Yes, I am a native of Fort Myers, Florida, and a product of the Lee County School District. I am in my 13th year with the school district. I am instructional this year. I am the diversity and inclusion coach for the district. And I have a beautiful little boy that's also a student.
Welcome. It's good to see so many familiar faces and new faces. My name is Jared Eady. I serve as the staff liaison. Background information, this is my 14th year in the school district of Lee County. I'm a product of the school district of Lee County, graduate of Fort Myers High School. We're happy to see you all here, and we're so excited about the great work we've accomplished this year. So thank you for your commitment to serve and your willingness to be a part of the conversation.
And I am Debbie Jordan. I am the liaison to this board. So I represent District 4, but I also represent the entire county. I was on EDAC last year, and we're continuing the great work that we started last year, which we'll see in just a little bit by Mr. Dr. Lost my whole train of thought. But so I apologize for that. But we do welcome all of you here, and it's really nice to see everybody come out and do this and participate.
Thank you for your introductions. Mr. Myers, still with us?
Okay, I'm Robert Myers, and our law firm is legal counsel to the interim legal counsel to the Lee County School District, and we've been tasked with doing ethics training for all of the committees. I did one last week, and one of my colleagues, I think, is going to be there in person this week to do 2 more, and I think then we have 1 more the following week. So this is kind of an abbreviated presentation. But if you do have questions, I mean, please stop me and I'll try to answer them. I know the group last week did have a couple questions and I answered them, and then there were some follow-up questions the next day. So, you know, this is for your benefit, and unfortunately I don't have that much time, so I'm going to try to go through things fairly quickly, but try to hit the highlights if I can. And just so you know, in addition to being with the law firm in Fort Lauderdale, I used to be the director of the Miami-Dade Commission on Ethics, so I've got a good amount of experience dealing with some of these issues that I'm going to be covering tonight. So the first thing is that we're going to do this in 4 parts. The first part is to talk about ethics and conflicts of interest briefly. Then we're going to talk about the Sunshine Law. We'll talk about public records, and then we'll talk about parliamentary procedure, okay? So let's talk about ethics first. I guess first thing that stands out to me is that you have a board rule. So this is a rule that was adopted by the Lee County School Board, basically saying that if you personally benefit from a vote that your committee takes, or if your employer will benefit from a vote your committee takes, you're not allowed to participate. So you've got to abstain. You can't discuss, you know, that item. You can't vote on that item. So that's a local rule that you have, and that's really consistent with state law. What state law says is if you have a voting conflict, you know, where you could benefit, or your family could benefit, or your employer could benefit, you're required to kind of state on the record what your conflict is, and then you're not allowed to participate in the discussion, and then you're not allowed to vote on the matter. So I guess the thing I'd like to emphasize is, what if you have a real conflict and you participate and vote, that could be a problem. If you have a perceived conflict, keep in mind that you are allowed to abstain if something might create a perception of a conflict for you. So it doesn't have to be an actual conflict. If you see it as something that might look bad, you know, that kind of that test of publicity, how does it look if it appears on the front page of the local news section? So think about that, you know, if a matter comes before your committee where you potentially could benefit, or somebody, a friend of yours, even though it's not an actual conflict, could benefit, you might want to disclose that and not participate. But keep in mind, if you have a conflict, you are required to either announce it at the meeting, or you have to announce it prior to the meeting. Because the idea is, if you have no conflict, you are required under the law to vote. So if you're in, let's say a vote comes up and you have no conflict, you must vote. You can't abstain. The only way I guess you're not counted for a vote is if you were to leave the room. But absent leaving the room or having a conflict, you are required to vote on any issue that comes before your committee. Another way where you could have a conflict is if, let's say, you or a family member were interested in doing business with the Lee County School District. And that's only if it's your company, it's a family member's company, you know, you have a material interest and ownership interest, you sit on the board of directors, and it's a for-profit company that we're talking about. We're not talking about a not-for-profit organization or an educational institution. We're really only talking about for-profit companies. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't work for a company that does business with Lee County school districts. It's just those companies if you have, like I say, an ownership interest. And under those circumstances, my recommendation is not to do business with the Lee County schools. Do business with the city, with the county, with the state, with another school district. Just don't do business with Lee County schools. I mean, it could be a real conflict, or it could, you know, let's say it's not even, you don't own the business, but let's say you're a high-level manager in the business, it may not look good. So that might be a reason not to do business with the district as well. So in terms of how the ethics rules are enforced, they're enforced by the State Ethics Commission based in Tallahassee. And what happens is somebody somebody files a complaint, and then the Ethics Commission assigns an investigator to it, and they take it from there. Keep in mind, the Ethics Commission has jurisdiction over hundreds of thousands of government employees, people who are employed by the state, by local government, people who are elected officials, people who sit on boards and committees. So they have a lot of people under their jurisdiction, but they have limited resources. And the only way a complaint gets to them is if somebody files a formal complaint. So somebody couldn't just give them information saying that I think committee member so-and-so has a voting conflict. They actually have to file an actual complaint, and then you get a notice of that complaint. Obviously, if that were to happen, you know, it should notify us so we can do what's necessary. So those are the basic, you know, ethics rules. A lot of it's common sense. But if you do have questions, I mean, you can ask the Ethics Commission for an opinion directly or through, you know, the attorney's office, or you can ask us for an opinion, and, you know, that will protect you. So that's one part of the presentation. The second part of the presentation deals with the Sunshine Law, and I'm sure most of you have heard about it, and some of you I heard have been on the committee before, but let me just kind of refresh your memory about what it is. All it says, it's very simple, that if two or more of you get together and you talk about your committee's business, you can only do that in a public meeting. You can't talk about anything that's in front of your committee or anything that likely could come before your committee. So I don't think any of you are clairvoyant, but if you are, you have to try to predict what could come before you. So I would stay away from having discussions about things that have come before you that have already been addressed, or general things in the, you know, in the district that may possibly come before your committee. So you can talk to each other outside of a public meeting about the weather, about your kids, about sports, about, you know, politics in general. What you can't do is you can't talk to each other about your committee's business. Because if you do that, you're in violation of the Sunshine Law unless you do that at a public meeting. And a public meeting requires that the meeting is noticed, that the public has the opportunity to attend the meeting, and that minutes are taken. So when I'm talking about communications, I'm talking about any sort of exchange, whether you talk to each other on the phone, whether you talk to each other, face to face, whether you Facebook one another, whether you email one another, any communication you use where you're communicating about your committee's business would be a violation of the Sunshine Law unless it's done in an open meeting. Now, you can send a one-way communication to another member, although I would discourage that because they may respond. Or you can talk to a member of the school board, or you can talk to a member of another committee, or you can talk to a school district staff. That's not covered by the Sunshine Law. As long as it's only one member talking to the employee or another board member of a different board or a school board member, that's okay. It's when two of you get together and you talk about, board business. So, let's say you're friends, you've known each other, for years. Yes, you got a question?
Yes, can you hold for just a second? We're gonna catch up to where you are. He's talking about the Sunshine Law. Go to this handout. It's on the second page.
Oh, you have a handout? Oh, I didn't know that.
So,
You did a great job, though.
committee members, in addition to that handout relative and specific to Sunshine Law, and that document also gives you just best practices in housekeeping related to your board committee membership here. Inside your folder, you will also find a handout version of Robert's Rules of Order parliamentary procedure, as well as the board policy that establishes this committee. So right now, our attorney is talking about sunshine, but things that are more germane and specific to your role as a committee member, we found in that document that says committee member training.
I can't really get everything that you said. Can you get closer to the mic so I can hear everything that you said?
Oh, you can continue with where you are. He was giving an explanation of what we have in our folder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just actually put something together, just kind of a two-pager that I gave to Chris, and I don't know if he was going to circulate it or not. But yeah, so I guess that's what I was saying is, just be careful what you talk to each other about. And like I say, nothing says that you can't, socialize, go out to dinner, go to church together, play golf together, but you're limited in what you can talk to each other about when you do, gather as committee members. Just understand, you agreed to serve on this committee, and whether you're on the school board or you're, a member of a city commission or on any other sort of board in the state of Florida, you've got to comply with the Sunshine Law. So like I say, in order for the meeting to be compliant, there's got to be notice to the public. It's got to be open to the public. So you hold your meetings, obviously, in a school district building, and then minutes have to be taken. You don't have to worry about the notice requirement. You don't really have to worry about minutes being taken or whether or not it's open to the public. I mean, we just want to make sure the public can attend, and in some cases, they have the right to participate as well. I would recommend against you kind of sending a memo, to other members of your committee, even if you say do not respond, let's say you feel strongly about, a specific issue that you're going to be tackling. The best thing to do is to send it to the liaison, and then let the liaison distribute it, and then it's up for discussion at your next committee meeting. But what we don't want is, if you send it directly to another committee member, he or she may want to respond, and what you get into is, an inadvertent violation of the Sunshine Law if they respond. Even if you went on Facebook, and let's say you post something on Facebook about what your committee has done or is doing, and another committee member were press like, that suggests there's a conversation or agreement between two people. So I'm not telling you can't use social media, but just be careful who your friends are on social media, especially if you have an exchange with a friend who's also sitting on your committee. Okay? Now, if you violate the Sunshine Law, not only could it be a criminal violation, there are civil penalties that can be imposed. the district is potentially liable, and any decision that you make that's in violation of the Sunshine Law has to be reconsidered. So you don't want to. It's not worth being under investigation for this. And like I say, if you have any questions about it, feel free to contact our office. Now, tied to the Sunshine Law is another law in the state of Florida called Public Records Law. And what that says essentially is any records that you collect or you send as a committee member is subject to disclosure. So let's say some resident, you live in a community and a resident knows that you're on a committee and they want to send you an email about something that your committee should consider. So now you have this email from this resident. Guess what? That record is a public record. So you have to do one of two things. Either you have to keep the record yourself, or you can forward it to the liaison, the district, and the district can maintain those records. Because under the Public Records Law, if you receive a public record, we've got to keep it for a period of time because the public has a right to get copies of those records and they have a right to inspect those records. So if you're the only person getting this record, somehow we need to make sure that those records are kept. Now, if everybody's getting it, let's say, somebody sends a letter to every school board member, every committee member, the superintendent, you don't have to keep that unless you respond. I mean, if you were to respond to that letter, that memo that person sends, then you'd have to keep it or forward it to the district to keep. But if it's just sent to everybody, you don't have to worry about holding on to it. Just like, for example, you get the agenda for your meetings. That's, you don't have to keep that. But if you get something sent to you personally as a committee member, you got to keep it or make sure it gets transferred to the district. So what I'm referring to is this is whether you get, let's say somebody sends you an email to your business email address, or they send it, they send you a letter to your home address, or they text you or something like that. Those are all potentially public records, and we've got to make sure that those are kept, by the district. Because if you don't keep them and somebody makes a public record request, they can sue you, they can sue the district, they can get attorney's fees. And the problem with all this is we don't, the person requesting a record, their motive could be to sue the school district. They don't have to identify who they are. They don't have to identify their purpose in requesting a record. They don't even have to put their records request in writing, if you can believe that. So let me give you an example of something I'm talking about. I don't mean to scare anybody, but let's say that you have an appointment book or a calendar, and in your calendar you write committee meeting 6 p.m. Okay. And the other entries into your appointment book say doctor's appointment at noon, pick up my son from school 4 p.m. If somebody made a request for your calendar, believe it or not, they could get your calendar because you sit on this committee. However, you can what we call redact those entries that have nothing to do with committee business. So, for example, you could redact the information about picking up your son at school or practice or your doctor's appointment. But what we would have to turn over is anything that relates to the committee, entry. So keep in mind, when you're sending something as a committee member or you're writing something down, in a calendar or an appointment book, that is a public record and somebody could ask to see it. And if you say, well, I don't have it, that's fine if you don't. But if you have an appointment book, you have received an email and you've sent an email out as a committee member and somebody requests it, we have to make it available to them. Now, we can charge people for public records requests, that's allowed by law, and we can also charge them for staff time assembling records, because sometimes they want a lot of different records from a lot of different sources, and we have the ability to charge them based on what staff gets paid on an hourly basis. So let's say somebody wanted all these records and we estimate it's $200 to produce all those records. We can tell the requester, you've got to give us $200 before we turn over the records to you. And you know what? If they refuse to turn over, if they don't have the money to give us, we don't have to give them the records. However, they still have the right to inspect the records. So it's two-part. One is they want copies of the records, then they have to be made available if they, if we want to charge them. And secondly, if they just want to see the records, we have to make the records available for them to look at. We have to turn over records within a reasonable period of time. So it really depends what they're asking for. If they wanted to see the agenda from your meeting tonight, that we should turn over rather quickly. On the other hand, let's say they wanted to see, they wanted to see the agendas and the minutes from the meetings the last 3 years of the school board, or they wanted to see all RFPs that had gone out, for certain matters over the last 5 years in the Lee County School District. They would have the right to that information, but it would take us a while to compile it, so we would have the right to assess charges and fees against them before we turn over the records. The other thing is, as I kind of mentioned, we have to make sure that the records that we turn over are public records. So, for example, there are things that are exempt, such as people's social security numbers, their medical information. Since you're in a school district, a lot of student records are confidential. So someone has to review records before they go out. So if you do receive a public records request, what I suggest you do is talk to your liaison or whoever your contact people are there, and just on your own respond to the records request. You should let somebody know, and then someone has to go through the record to make sure that there's nothing in that record that's confidential or exempt. Because if we turn over something that's confidential, we could be sued there for releasing confidential information. So that basically is the public records law. We're very liberal in the state of Florida. Almost everything is a public record, and when you agree to sit on a board or committee in the state of Florida, you're subject to these public records laws. Okay? So the last area for me to cover is to talk about Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure. And I guess the first thing to note is that you follow Robert's rules with the exception of the quorum requirement. And what I mean by that is you're allowed to conduct business without having a quorum. Robert's rules say that you can't, but you allow it, so that's fine. You can overrule Robert's. You're not bound by it, but you said that these are the rules that you're generally going to follow. And what I would say to you is we want you to follow Robert's rules, but we don't want to focus on technical violations of Robert's rules. We don't want that to take precedence over substantive actions that your committee takes. So why do we have Robert's rules? To maintain order, structure, efficiency. We want you to hold meetings that are efficient. We want people to be respectful of one another. We want there to be order. And generally, that's kind of the chair's responsibility. The chair calls the meeting to order. The chair is supposed to preserve the quorum and order as best he or she can. Obviously, if there's something that's out of order, a member can bring that to the attention of the chair. So, what we really want to make sure is that when you have items that you're considering, that you don't attack each other, that you don't discuss things that are irrelevant. It's got to work in where the chair recognizes a member, members just don't blurt things out. They need to be recognized by the chair in order to speak. And once that person's been recognized, that person doesn't yield the floor until he or she is done speaking. Now, can we limit how long somebody can speak? Sure. I mean, we can even do that with the board members or the public at large. We don't want people going on forever, whether on the committee or whether they're, a member of the public who's attending your meeting. But we don't interrupt people when they're speaking. And we generally don't want to let people speak more than one time on the same issue. So you have, I think, 15 members on your committee that, let's say each of you want to speak one time, and if it's kind of a controversial issue or an issue, kind of a hot button issue, and you want to speak more than once, I mean, it's really up to the chair to decide that. But as a general rule, kind of one time through makes more sense. And we definitely don't want to allow somebody to speak more than once when other members who have something to say haven't been recognized or acknowledged. So the chair needs to kind of make sure that equalized participation has the best, in terms of, getting community business done. the chair is allowed to, make motions or second motions. The chair is supposed to be objective, obviously, like all of you. And, committee members are expected to attend on a regular basis. You've got to be courteous and respectful to one another. The idea is to work together as harmoniously as possible, but also you have the right to offer your personal opinions about things, and you don't always have to have a consensus vote or a unanimous vote. I mean, it's okay to be on the other side, but the minutes will reflect that. There was a vote and all 15 were present, and it was 13 to 2. We have to identify who those 2 people were who voted against the item. And the other thing is, you're recording. If you record your committee meetings, those recordings are public records too, so somebody can ask to listen to the tape of the meetings. So, in terms of how Robert's rules function, it operates through making of motions. And generally, what happens is the chair will bring the item to the floor, and then someone makes a motion. In order for the matter to be discussed by the assembly, there has to be a second, as you know. And then you have your discussion, and after the discussion, the chair calls for a vote. I would recommend that before you actually vote on anything, the chair restates the motion for a couple reasons. Sometimes motions can be complicated. Secondly, if you've had a lengthy discussion, some people may not recall exactly what the motion was about. So we want to make sure that people are aware of what they're voting on. And then, the motion passes or fails, and the chair announces the vote. Most votes, it's just a simple majority, but there are exceptions to that. Then you kind of go on to the next matter. And, through Robert's rules, we have all sorts of, motions. We have motions to amend the main motion. We have motions to postpone, motions to suspend, motions to end debate, calling the question, motions to reconsider an item. Well, let me just say one thing about amendments, because this happens a lot, and I just want to be clear on it, that there's no such thing as a friendly amendment. So if one of you make a motion, and the motion is seconded, and you have some discussion, and then another member says, I'd like to make a friendly amendment, does the maker of the motion accept my friendly amendment? That doesn't exist. There's no friendly amendments. I mean, either an amendment is made and it's voted up or down. It doesn't matter whether the maker of the motion agrees to accept it or not. So if you can make amendments to motions, but there is no such thing as a friendly amendment. So most things are done through, motions and votes by the assembly. However, there are certain situations, like let's say a board member or a committee member has a point of order or a point of information. There's no second necessary for that matter to be addressed, and then that matter is ruled on by the chair. Now, it's possible that if the assembly doesn't agree with the chair's ruling, they can actually vote to overrule the chair. But in general terms, in most cases, if some member has a point of information or a point of order, that is directly presented to the chair. That's the one circumstance where you are allowed to kind of interrupt the speaker if it's a point of order or a point of information. So that's, in a nutshell, the 4 areas: Robert's Rules, Public Records, Sunshine Law, and conflicts of interest. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Any questions? I don't think there's any questions, Mr. Myers.
Okay, very well. If anyone does, feel free to email me, with them, and I'll be happy to respond. So thank you so much for listening, and appreciate, your service from Lee County School District.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Okay, sure thing. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, at this time, we'll open the floor for nominations for chair. Every year, we have to elect new leadership. Currently, Dennis is our vice chairman. However, just to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have a discussion, I don't participate as a voting member in this process. I'm just opening the floor for facilitation of the election of the new chairman. So at this time, I will entertain any nominations for the chair of the EDAC committee for this year. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I nominate. Do I have to explain why I nominate somebody or just nominate the name?
Just nominate.
Just nominate. I nominate Mr. Ken Jones to be the next chair of IDA. I second that. Please.
You accept?
Ken Jones.
No. No, I don't.
Who wants to participate? So are there any other nominations for chair?
Can you share what the expectations are, Chair?
Sure. Your chairman just presides over the meeting, and they also coordinate with business board, or whoever the board liaison might be, to create the agenda for the balance of the meeting. So currently, Dr. Manaya served in the role in the past, and Mr. Quisenberry was his vice chair after the election of chair. And I'll be quiet, and that'll go over to the chairperson, and will facilitate the election of the vice chair. Any other nominations for your chair? Mr. Quisenberry.
I'd like to nominate myself as the chair for the upcoming year.
Okay. There's a nominee on the board for Mr. Quisenberry. I'm sure you accept the virtue of nominating yourself. Okay.
I'd like to nominate Dr. Kundu. I'm not sure.
Louis, you accept the nomination?
I thank you very much, but I covered it, right? Thank you so much.
Are there any additional nominees? Any additional nominees? Hearing no additional nominees, the acting chair temporarily will entertain a motion to close the nominations as they currently stand. Is there a motion to close nominations or keep them open for additional chair nominees?
Can I ask another question?
Of course you can.
Just because it seems really, because there's new members to the committee, and I feel as though none of us really have enough information to nominate a chair. Is it necessary that we nominate a chair tonight?
Yes. Board policy stipulates at the first meeting that you have to go through the election process.
So in the future, I think it would be helpful as new EDAC members that we had a better understanding of who is interested and who the other members are, because it's really hard to make an informed, educated decision about who's going to be meeting with us through the next year. I mean, as a member last year, I knew we were in good hands because I knew you, and I got to see you in action at several meetings. So I personally feel uncomfortable voting for somebody I don't know. And as a new member, I would imagine all the new members feel that way as well. It would be valuable to have bios of each of our members so we can better understand what the skill sets are in the room and what people's passions are going forward.
Right. I think, valid point. The only thing that gets tricky with that, because of sunshine, that means I'd have to have somebody let them know that I was nominated to have that discussion. So it's based on perhaps something that the board can look at changing that. But right now, that's kind of where we're
It's
stuck.
unrealistic, I see.
Move the nomination to close with Mr. Quisenberry.
Sir,
Do you have a seconder or you don't need one?
he accepted, so that's the nominee here. So right now, he's the only nominee that we have. That's how the process worked last year. Help me out, Mr. Past Chairman. I'm just kind of following the procedure that we all established last year, which was according to Roberts.
And my question is, nothing like the previous one, that once a nomination is made, there should be a seconder.
If it's in the version of a motion, if you'd like to facilitate a second, you can do so. So would you like to second the nomination? So what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Bianou, is that you would like to have a second for the nomination of Mr. Quisenberry before we go forward.
In that case, I do that.
Okay? Is there a second to his nomination?
Second.
Any other nominees? Okay, right now the floor is open with one nominee. Got to be some motion on the floor, so is there a motion to accept the one nominee and close the election process by acclamation, or is there a desire to keep the floor? So is there a motion to close the nomination process? I move to call the question. There's a motion on the floor, is there a second to Mr. Dennis's motion? Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion on the main points on the floor to accept Mr. Dennis Quisenberry as your EDAC representative and chair? Any additional discussion? See no discussion, all those in favor with the motion on the floor to elect Mr. Quisenberry by acclamation due to a lack of additional candidate, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposition, similar sign. Seeing opposition, Mr. Chairman, you may choose.
Thank you. Thank you all for your nomination. We're gonna move on to choosing a vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? EDAC committee this year. Mr.
In view of the fact that we are a diverse group, diversity, I want to nominate Corey as the vice chair.
I do want to give you a little background on vice chair, since you brought it up, Cole. The vice chair does fill in for the chairperson when necessary, as far as running meetings and also attending the board meetings to present our agenda and board minutes. I fill in for Mr. Manaya last year for a meeting or so. So you will have some responsibility outside of coming to these meetings. You may be called on to attend a meeting during the school day, whenever the board meeting may be. In addition to providing some reports that may be required with the chairperson not available to provide those. All right. Please continue.
Having had that, I still stand by my nomination of Ms. Corey Bright. Corey Bright Carrick. I hope I got that one.
Do you accept the nomination? Is there a second to the nomination? Did you accept any? Are there any further nominations for the vice chair? Resigns. Any additional nominations for vice chair? And last call for any additional nominations for vice chair. Is there a motion to close the nominations?
Move to call the question.
Is there a second?
Second.
Appears that the nominations are closed. Is there a vote? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, the same sign. Okay. So there is a motion to approve the agenda. It is in your folders. Is there a motion to approve our agenda? Need a second. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Agenda is approved. Okay. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from our last committee meeting? It's also in your packet.
Well, I guess this only applies to the people who attended the meeting, and in that case, I propose that we adopt the minutes of last meeting, and the meeting of May 13th.
That's your motion, all right? That's right. Is there a second? Is there a second to approve the minutes? Second. All in agreement, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Mr. Manaya, he has a recap of some of the work we did last year with EDAC.
Perfect.
All right. Well, congratulations, Chair and Vice Chair.
Please tell everyone you're.
Guido Minaya, and I again served as chair last year. Have been with EDAC for many years and love this committee. Does very important work. But each year there's 2 more, right, to get further. So why don't we start? We're going to talk a little bit about how we got to today, some of the background around EDAC, and some of the important steps that we took last year as a committee. So I'm a teacher facilitator, learner more for adult learning corporations. So what if we all read this? Because this is really our grounding. So let's read this out loud. The mission of the committee shall be to monitor the district's maintenance of a unitary school system and adherence to school board policies concerning equity and diversity. The committee shall review and provide input concerning revisions to the student assignment plan and any proposal to acquire a school site, construct or abandon a school facility, right? So, I mean, it's interesting, right? We're in a committee like this, and some of our responsibilities are to review and approve or not approve the student assignment plan, make recommendations to the student assignment plan, as well as any site that's acquired or built or to abandon a school facility, right? And believe it or not, we had one committee member, she's not here this evening, who attended the Lehigh school meetings for the construction, right? And she was our representative. So you will actually be able to volunteer to represent us during those meetings. And you learn quite a bit of the planning, the demographics, the diversity of that area. And you're our representative to say, yes, we should move forward, or we have additional questions, right? So it's a pretty important meeting. I'm believe it or not, I am still learning about the breadth of how we can influence. And so each year you just learn even more as to how this committee can provide, at a minimum, a voice. May not change the outcome, but a minimum of voice as to how the school district works through its diversity and equity issues. So a little bit of background, and sincerely Mr. Eady and others who have a lot of background on the history of our community. I pulled up a news press article from 2014 where it was a nice little summary, right? And basically EDAC was created as a result of a desegregation order, right? In 1989, a task force was created to oversee this desegregation order. And the school board also had to receive approval from the court for any expansion of new schools. So this is in 1989, right? We're not talking about the 60s or the 50s or the 40s, we're about 1989. A task force, that's you've been given the torch. A task force still exists today as Lee County's Equity and Diversity Advisory Committee. It initially started as an advisory committee to the superintendent. I was there when it was part of an advisory committee to the superintendent. Really didn't have much of a, we had great discussions in here, but they never left the room, right? Once it became a committee that reports to the school board, different story. Our voice was heard, and we were able to influence even more. So this is, and all this just happened probably in 2015, right? So in the 90s, Lee introduced, so out of all this, I think the 2 points that are important is a settlement in the initial lawsuit was reached in 1999. So again, this is pretty recent, right? 1999, it led to Lee receiving a unitary status. Unitary status, a court term for a school system that has transitioned from what was perceived as a segregated school system into a desegregated school system, right? So pretty interesting stuff. So yeah, in the last line, the district was also required to close the achievement gap between minorities and non-minorities and hire more minority teachers. We're still, even as of last year, this was a primary focus for us, right? So all this in 20 years ago. So in 2018, I think we determined that 20 years of following through EDAC's historic, let's say, structure and times have changed. Our population has changed. And we felt that it was time to reframe ourselves, right? So some of the things that we did is, and maybe even as we're thinking about reframing our vision and all that, an early recommendation based, you're gonna get some great reports. You're gonna get staff that comes in and gives you, here's the latest, here's 20 people's work in one report, right? And you get to ask questions, and you get to make some conclusions. One report came in that at the time, we had 37 social workers for our school district of 93,000 students. 37 social workers. What's best practice? 1 for every 400, right? So it didn't take rocket science for us to say, let's recommend more social workers, right? But unless a committee like EDAC says this, that can be taken by our board liaison to the school board. They can look at that and say, yeah, maybe we need to do more of that, because there's always so many competing interests in how funding is going to be dispersed, right? So things like this, you get to influence, right? But those presentations are very, very valuable. Second quarter, I think out of all of this, fortunately, Mr. Eady was already working on a professional development plan for the school district. And basically, we listened to his report and said, we need to support this, and we need to take a vote that we are in support of this, and we want to even further expand it. So as staff, Mr. Eady's doing great work, but again, staff needs additional support from us, from the public, to be able to say, yeah, and even this committee feels that it's important, let's consider expanding it, right? And guess what? Look at this expansion. Did we have 2 you last year? 2. We didn't have Mr. Eady at the beginning of, and 2 years ago, there was a recommendation to bring on somebody like Mr. Eady. His role is, how old's your role? 2 years?
Not quite.
Not quite. Never had a role like his. And man, once you get to know him a little more, he's doing incredible work. And his recommendation was, I need additional support. I need a coach. There's so much to do. We need to coach some of our staff, and I can't do it alone. Thank God that our little voice, along with a bunch of others, said this is the right direction, right? So our new vision statement. We didn't have a vision statement. We had a mission, but not a vision statement. So community and Cole was involved, Dr. Peter was involved, Corey was involved. So a number of us were here to come up with this. A community where individuals feel safe, cared for, and connected as one, all having access to equity, feeling included to cultivate diversity and inclusiveness, right? So again, a little bit of a broader statement than just what the mission was, because it's a new world. There's different situations happening in our communities, and this is a pretty important committee. Third quarter, I think the net of the third quarter is we didn't really, there's Envision 2030, great strategic plan by the school district, covers a bunch of areas, but we didn't see any tangible metrics that says, you know what, we're gonna hire this many additional minority teachers. And not that we have a target or a quota, but there was no metrics in there about this kind of stuff. So you all get to provide input as to what should that target or that goal be, right? And without our voice, it won't, there's again, too many competing interests. So then we had one of our top goals, attract and retain teachers. So how? Create a survey for newly hired teachers, identifying minority status, that asked them about what school did they graduate from and why they selected Lee County. Because in many cases, if I select Lee County to teach in, I've got some good reasons. Is it family? Is it because my kids go to Lee County or what? But if we find out more and more data as to why minority teachers are selecting our schools, then maybe we could start targeting others that fit a similar profile, right? Similarly, create a survey of newly hired teachers identifying minority status after they've been with the district for 1 year and say, how do you like it? How's it going? And then another survey after 3 to 5 years. We've got great data on the general population of teachers, but when we're, at least in the past, when we were asked to say, how about this subpopulation? Do we know what's influencing them? We didn't have that kind of data, right? Or that kind of data wasn't summarized. and create a survey for individuals identifying minority status who are offered a contract and don't accept employment here. You know, just as we can learn from those that do accept, what about those that don't accept? And again, that's great data for us, right? Strengthen and support diversity training. I talked about this. Mr. Edie already had a good plan and we were in support of this, so no worries there. Community engagement and communications. Look at how families from diverse communities want to receive information from the school district and how that's shared with them. And there was a point about fundraising, right? That sometimes there's a number of fundraising initiatives, but some of the minority communities may not be as familiar with it and don't necessarily know how to support it. So there was a point about fundraising and including some kind of a form for that. So this committee can look at that a little bit more this coming year. Data analytics, and I talked about this a little bit earlier. So really, the net of all this is that if we're going to collect all this data that can inform us, who's on point to analyze the data, right? So the recommendation was to create a new role, a data analytics role, whether it was contracted out to some company or whether the school district funded it or whether it was a partial role for someone that's already in the school district, someone that's tapped to look at this data, summarize it for us, so that then we can make informed decisions and recommendations, right? Attraction activities, a referral, some kind of a referral program where our teachers and other staff can refer other candidates from other local industries and also from online universities. Consider recruiting at food festivals, work with the Visitors and Convention Bureau. This is probably, I would say, I mean, I've got a long history with large companies. This is probably one of the, once you grow past 10,000 employees, there's something called employee resource groups, and you may have heard of them, right? Employee resource groups are, let's say, the women teachers of Lee County. They would have their own network and sort of like a little association, and they support each other. And what I find with what I found, and many have found with these, is those that are members are better able to learn how to become future leaders because now they've got role models from their community, right? So in all of the various communities, having these employee resource groups helps build future leaders, right? And a little bit of a safer space to talk about why I want to be a leader and some of my challenges, right? So that's on the table. We didn't get to this, and this was the metrics around what do we want to see at the end of this coming school year in terms of the increase in minority teachers? What do we want to see next school year and by 21-22? So that is work that's still left for this committee to look at. And sincerely, this has probably been one of the best experiences for me in helping the school district. And my guess is I'll come back in a few years. Right now I'm also a school board member on a charter school, the Oasis Schools, and that's taking a little bit of time, so that's the only reason I didn't throw my name in the hat again. But any questions? Any questions? Shirley?
I know you've all worked on restorative discipline in years past, and I know that there was talk about getting that implemented. How far along is that, or has it already been implemented, and at what stage are we?
Great question. Great, three-part question.
Sure. Restorative practices. So right now, with a lot of refreshing and revisiting the student discipline policy, there's actually a restorative practices committee meeting this week. That falls under the auspices of Mr. Chuck Bradley because of positive prevention. So it's in the process of making sure that we, last year, looked at the student code of conduct. So that was the first impetus, looking at the conduct to make sure those things were in alignment. There was a presentation going before the board related to discipline procedures and processes. And now the committee is meeting this week to talk about the next steps. So I can provide information after the meeting. That's okay, Mr. Board.
Thank you very much.
Sir?
Dr. Knapp, by the way, thank you so much. Really, you did a great good job. We have worked together for several years. This is probably the first time I'm not having you here, but hope you can come back. But if you can go back to the slide before this, please. So that's the most central issue. I don't remember, but I hope Dennis, you have the statistics, because this is where we now pick up. That's the most important part. And I think we had some numbers, but some actual statistics to say increased by what percentage. But that alone was not enough. It's also a question of what actions do we need to see to get to those numbers. And I think that's important. I don't know whether you still have those numbers, because we had those, the question mark, Dr. Minaya, I think we had completed by the last two meetings.
We talked about those numbers, and I
Yes.
think that we were at a disagreement about what the numbers represented. We talked about an increase in the number of overall teachers, and we talked about retention of teachers. And so I think we left it with trying to decide what that number was supposed to represent year to year.
And that's why I was talking about, like, at some point, we need to focus on the 2 areas, both the hiring process and also the retention. What do we need to do? Some of the things Dr. Minaya just talked about. How do we do that? We had some statistics, maybe check on that, and then maybe that's an area to pick up what we stopped at in March, April or something.
Also, diversity and inclusion needs some attention, and what intentional measures has the district taken to hire a more diverse school system and teachers that represent the student population?
There are a number of efforts for recruiting, right, with our HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, with our HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions. So there are relationships. There is some funding for that kind of recruiting. Could it be more? Could it be better well-defined? Absolutely. But there is some steps that have continued to increase from 2015 to now. It doesn't mean that we're all the way there yet, but there's some great steps. Anything else, Mr. Reedy?
Sure. In addition to the partnership mentioned by Dr. Minaya, the district created a relocation bonus. So for individuals who are recruited from universities like FAU, FIU, FAMU, some of the targeted schools, there's an opportunity to have a special relocation assignment bonus for $1,000 for individuals at those schools. There's a district minority recruitment and retention committee that is not necessarily a subcommittee of this group, but it's connected to the work that happens here. That is an opportunity to look at a lot of these best practices and be very intentional and specific as it relates to recruitment. Not to put him on the spot, but last year there was conversation about hearing from teachers who were recruited. Mr. Davis, as a newer teacher within 5 years, was a part of that conversation as a new recruit from the Florida Fund for Minority Teachers. So not just looking at recruitment from the standpoint as I'm showing up at the university and saying, come here, but also looking at the standpoint, we've got you here. I can't trade on, I remember the questions were, what brought you here? The connections, why you picked this location over the others. So Sean, just kind of getting to that point of being anecdotal to match up with the analytics that's tracked over the job. So that's part of it. They're really innovative programs, not because Dr. Giannulli on the spot, but they call me Mr. Program that we were looking at. So looking outside of the box of bringing best practices from places like Clemson University as a part of the approach that we have for the school district. We're always open for suggestion. I think the thing is that this committee can really be helpful, is giving us additional input as to ways you think that we could be out recruiting to bring folks in. So I'm not speaking for the HR division, but a part of the minority recruitment and retention committee. That's the major part of the work is let us know where to go and how does that approach work, even down to if I'm going to recruit at FAMU, making sure that my paraphernalia is orange and green, so I'm tying into the university. They have that personalized approach. FAMU was a pilot school last year. We invited representatives from the College of Education to come down and have a chat session with us to say, okay, here's what it looks like to recruit students from university specifically. Instead of us showing up, tell us what you need us to do. And their big thing was help us with professional development. The current status of education is we shared last year with the chair and with the committee, I think it was the 2017 or 2018 graduation out of the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University's graduation, less than 30 of those kids majored in education. So we have a pipeline that we have to fill because kids have not made it. And I don't want to speak for Mr. Davis, who's a recent graduate, but we don't have a lot of students in general majoring in education. So we have to be very creative in how we recruit outside of colleges.
The only other separate point is the way you're organized now in these smaller tables. We found that this helps support more dialogue. Before we had one big you or whatever, and one person talk, and we didn't get all the great ideas. Now with these smaller tables, you can provide more input to your team members, and then that gets reported out here. So sincerely, your lens and your voice is critical.
And Mr. Edie, now that you have mentioned Call Me Mister,
Yes, sir.
I think it's important to highlight here that the Call Me Mister group is coming to Fort Myers in November. I know we're working with Dr. Martin and all that. I would propose very strongly from EDA that the members, particularly the members who are working as instructors, who are members of this committee, hopefully we can recommend they be invited to the Call Me Mister, because it's something that can be spread out in the district. Those people are coming from the South Triangle in North Carolina and also Kentucky, Charlotte and all that. They are coming to train people here. It would be nice to have the people like Dr. Roseberry or some other people in the profession in the school district. Yes, that would be very good. But also, just to sum this up, I wanted to hear from the board members, because Debbie and what effort they are doing to answer that question too. Because I think the board is doing a lot of effort for that too. Yeah. And then having our input in that. To share here too.
Well, right, there's lots of things I cannot say because we have another board member, so I am in sunshine.
Okay.
So I cannot speak on some of the things that
Something
may
cannot
come up
photo,
to the
yeah.
board. So just I want to clarify that right now. But does anybody have any other information that they want to ask Dr. Minaya?
Speak freely.
No, we cannot speak if we're together. But is there any other questions for Dr. Minaya?
Now you can answer the question.
Well, we are.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me, real quick, I would really like to thank Dr. Minaya. Thank you so very much for doing this. This was really, really in-depth of what we started last year. And it brings everybody maybe up to date to where we're at. And we do have all the information, as Mr. Julie was asking, regarding last year and numbers. We do still have all of that information. So I do want to make sure that we will get that out to you. But we, even as a board, we're doing board development in diversity and inclusion as well. So we're working on us as individuals to make sure that we are all on board, same with the staff and everyone else. So what Mr. Edie has started, it has just gone over to us as board members, which is really a good thing for us to see that. And community engagement, we are working on that as well, because we have our first Franklin Park meeting is tomorrow evening, so that it will be held at Franklin Park, and it is for the community. So we'll be going out to different communities within Lee County to let them know what is taking place here within the district, and listening to what they have to say, actually hearing them. We'll be collecting, I know I will at the forum tomorrow, I'll be collecting all the addresses and emails and telephone numbers for all of the people who will attend that meeting, so that way we can create a newsletter so we can keep disseminating that information out to the community of what is taking place in their areas. But as far as the hiring, Sean, is that what you were speaking of?
Well, yeah, we just did a huge batch of hiring for this school year. So I was hoping that we might be able to get some update on how many educators we were able to.
I would not have that information right now. And I know like today is kind of, because it is our first meeting, we have a lot of information to share with all of you, and then we'll get onto the programs of whatever you would want to hear or see. We can make that happen to, for you. Any kind of numbers and things like that. So with that, I took my time and I gave it to Dr. Minaya, because I wanted to make sure that he shared that information with all of you, because I thought that was imperative that we had that. So going forward, we're going to have Mr. Edie speak on what his updates.
Okay, I'll be brief. I won't take up too much of your time. So to the point, our board liaison and our former meeting past chairman talked about the recommendations. Just as informational points, as stated by the board attorney, it's not required for us to have quorum to operate as a committee. However, when any additional or required recommendations are received from the committee, it is required that a vote is taken and the vote is recorded. So for example, the committee met last year and there were some issues that Dr. Dianubi talked about they did not get a chance to resolve. That is because the committee did not come to an official recommendation as a committee. So once the recommendations are given, as your board votes or your committee votes on it, and as a part of your recommendation to the school board, it's recorded on a tracking sheet, and we go through and track and see what the process is in the communication. I want to give the board a brief conversation about where we stood last year as it related to diversity and inclusion, specifically for some of the recommendations that I presented to the committee and you all signed on for. So without further ado, there are 3 major points that concluded the end of last year. First one, as a part of the superintendent's action plan, I took the conversation that we had here and incorporated within his action plan for his evaluation. 100% of administrators will complete diversity and inclusion-related professional learning by June 30th of 2020. Last year, coming out of the gate in December of last year, all of our principals and some of our central office staff were trained on building inclusive teams. So that was dealing with perceptual biases, dealing with unconscious bias. How do we bring together an inclusive team from a manager HR perspective? Our principals participated in that, as alluded to by our board liaison. Our board members have now completed that 4-hour training, as well as a follow-up training that occurred last week for the conversation, so they hear the same messages that our administrators heard. In addition to that, I did present to the committee last year the idea of having all staff members complete diversity awareness training as an online apparatus of safe schools. That was implemented for this year. And just so you'll know, I'll go back to the next slide. There were 2 components of it that we wrote into it. There was staff to student diversity awareness as well as staff to staff. So if you notice, this was some of the conversation that was presented. All staff members, for those who are not instructional connected, had to complete this 20-minute or so required component, and it talked about defining diversity, identifying behaviors intentional and unintentional that can discriminate or contribute to a hostile learning environment, and then examining our ways of communication and reminders related to district policies connected to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then the next component of it was diversity awareness staff to student. This was for instructional staff members, had to take this required training to look at themselves as cultural agents, as diversity agents to guide their interaction with our students. By no means is this a one-stop, one and done, but this was an opportunity as presented last year to have exposure for all of our district employees. So when district employees log in, training related to health, related to asbestos and other things that are required for safety data, this was something that I approached the superintendent based on your recommendation. It was then approved and forwarded over that all staff members have to complete this by the end of October 2020. Or October, this was 2019. The last one is host quarterly culturally responsive teaching professional learning opportunities. We have Crystal Torres Nunez, who is our diversity and inclusion coach. I'll give her an opportunity to introduce herself in a second and kind of give an overview of what she's been working on. We've been providing culturally responsive teaching practices last year through a grant provided by some of our magnet schools. We trained close to about 100 teachers or so here at the district office for a 2-day intensive 8-hour training connected to culturally responsive teaching, empowering and transforming educators, as well as through the lens of the Advancement via Individual Determination Program, also known as AVID, which I serve as director of as well. That was a way to provide that professional development for our staff and those connected to school level. This is an overview of the Building Inclusive Teams training, just kind of letting you see some of the modules that the principals went through. Module 2, perspective, unconscious and implicit bias. We talked about cross-cultural competency. Our principals did this December of last year. And then after the last meeting we had in May, our school board did participate, and one last session that we had was last Monday. Yes, last Monday.
Yes.
The plan components for professional development, we see ourselves in 2-pronged approach here. The first one is culturally relevant teaching. How can we get strategies within the content area for our teachers to be culturally responsive to the various dimensions related to diversity and inclusion? And then the next part, looking at our employees and our staff and our teachers as cultural agents. How do we identify ourselves as cultural beings so we don't have miscommunications with us as employees, and then also hopefully not having some of those miscommunications with our children. So that is the overview, leveraging diversity and culture to foster a supportive school community. We've been taking that show on the road Crystal's been taking the show on the road, going out to schools who have requested that, as well as offering at the district office. Another part of the superintendent's evaluation plan was that on a quarterly basis, in addition to the school-based professional development that's offered, on a quarterly basis, there'll be diversity, culture, or culturally relevant teaching practices hosted here at the district office, provided by the Diversity Inclusion Department or the Professional Development Department. So that's already in the calendar, and Crystal can kind of go over what we're working on next. Next, hot off the press, you guys get a chance to look at it. We're going back and forth and looked at it. We do have our new diversity newsletter that has not been forwarded yet. So you get to see the first 2 pages of it in our draft form. But this is just a recap of what we worked on as a department in the month of August. First page talks about working at Paul Lawrence Dunbar Middle School. The second page talks about over 500 teachers attended a keynote speaker at Lehigh Senior High School to kick off the year. And it was the top 10 things that culturally relevant teachers do. So to give a vantage point and a frame of reference to start the year, 500 teachers by no means are all district employees. However, it gave us an opportunity to get that exposure in 2 sessions to have this keynote speaker to kick off the year. And then off to the side, you will notice the upcoming professional development opportunities that we provided. October, here in the Caloosahatchee room, leveraging diversity and inclusion, and then also a session of culturally responsive and relevant teaching practices in December. And then now, in the next section, honoring Hispanic Heritage Month. Our goal is to make sure for every cultural awareness and celebration within our newsletter, there is a spotlight and a highlight to make sure that's included, even down to next month. Crystal's already having a conversation about what we want to include in that. And so it's Disability Awareness Month, and she's already going out having a conversation about inclusive practices. That will be the highlight of the next one for the month of September. So finally, to kind of make sure that the conversation is making its way up to the superintendent, in addition to having the recommendations to the board, we do have a proposal for a superintendent's diversity, inclusion, civil rights, and equity cabinet. Any position or office or division that has a connection to diversity, equity, or civil rights related concerns, policies, or procedures will meet with the superintendent on a quarterly basis. If you notice, it covers law, it covers the equity and civil rights compliance coordinator. This committee last year approved that position to be forwarded to the board. The advertising for that closed last Friday. That reports to the staff attorney. So that is your compliance in connected to equity and civil rights compliance. That will report to our staff attorney. We wrote that organizational chart to mirror Miami-Dade County as well as Orange County, ensuring that compliance-related issues are filtered through the staff attorney to make sure that our process, at least as much as possible, mirrors OCR. In addition to that recommendation, Crystal was brought on as our diversity and inclusion coach. As the coach, she provides professional development, action planning, follow-up with our schools, and so it's not just a team of one. She gets to deal with me during the week. So those are the 2 professional positions that this committee looked at last year and offered feedback. The compliance officer, the position closed last Friday, so that is now on the staff attorney to start the hiring process, and Crystal has been with us since the month of July. So with that being said, I'll talk next steps. Crystal and I did have an opportunity to present at the Florida School Board Attorneys Association connected to the Equality Florida and supporting for LGBTQ students. The district is now working on a best practices 1-page sheet to make sure that our principals are aware how to support our population of students. So they're making sure they follow the law as it relates to policy, procedure, and we'll be providing training in the month of November from Equality Florida. Edie Palazzo will be here to provide that training to our principals connected to transgender student support as well as the LGBTQ students. And then in addition to that, Crystal has already started conversations to work with our GSA advisors. We'll be having training and support for our GSA advisors. There's a webinar that's here next week. So we've been moving, trying to get some things accomplished, and I'm required, and Crystal talked about some things that she has from the department.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I have been out to quite a few schools already, implementing best practices for inclusive practices for all of our students. Who wants me to talk about myself? I've been with the Lee County School District. This is my 13th year. I started out initially as a supportive behavior or EBD educator, teaching K-1. I had 7 little boys my first year with the district. I have done everything from teacher leader to ESE department head to behavior specialist. Preferably, my background is working with a diverse population of students and adults. I've been coaching and mentoring for many years with the district, including beta and gyms and many other areas. I work with the Support Our Students SOS program during the summer as a lead instructor. Before that, I was a substance abuse counselor for at-risk youth for 11 to 17-year-olds in a runaway homeless shelter, Oasis Youth Shelter. So I have a very diverse background and have worked with many different populations. I've opened several schools as well. Harsh Middle is one. But in my role now, it's just taking everything from my previous background and just doing what I enjoy doing, working with adults to be better at what they're doing for our students. The whole reason we're here is for inclusive practices for all of our students. So going out and doing the professional development opportunities is enlightening for me. I enjoy it very, very much. I enjoy each and every day doing something different, from working with NAACP to working with Equality Florida, and just learning something new as I go throughout each school. Today I went out to Pine Woods and did some inclusive practices visits where they do full inclusion at their school location. So I'm just doing a little bit of everything, whatever I can get my hands in. Absolutely adore it. So.
Good. How do you keep on track of all that?
I have a calendar and a lot of energy.
That's great.
I have a calendar and a lot of energy.
Yes.
Did the superintendent participate in the diversity and inclusion training?
Yes, he was a part of the governor's team in both sessions.
And did you receive any pushback regarding the LGBT policy?
So right now, the way the policy is currently written, there's conversation of us going forward to change the policy to include gender and gender identity expression. Policy. Our teacher and our labor unions did adopt that language about 2 years ago. So it is a part of your official non-discrimination policy. We want to make sure that our district policy is in alignment with that. That is not going to the board yet. I still want to do the staff process, so I can't ascertain as to what the ending might be, but so far, we'll be moving forward with the support of our students. So from our standpoint, he asked us to go to the Florida School Board Association conference, and we were the Florida School Board Attorneys Association, we were talking about what we're doing, our GSA support, as well as the conversation supporting our transgender.
And Sarasota was another model. I mean, they are probably a little bit more conservative than our district, maybe. But they have a wonderful policy that they put in place for
a critical support guide. So eventually that is a plan to have a critical support guide connected to supporting our population of children. Right now, our first step is to getting that one-pager out to make sure that's a part of it, but our continuing plan for our next steps, which that's the end of each year. That's the first part of it, but the next step, once all the policies are reflective, we'll be moving forward and coming back to the committee to look at the non-discrimination policy correctly.
It's awesome. This is a big step. Congratulations. Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Edie or Ms. Nunez?
The trainings that you're going to be conducting, are those going to be annual requirements, or is it just like a?
That is annual, so that was written from the superintendent to make it an annual requirement with the connection of the MOU connected with our NAACP, and it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to make sure that it's going to be part of the repertoire.
It is a part of the requirement, and that's been reaffirmed, it's been brought to the board, the conversations from HR, we've gotten some good feedback. Of course, there are always gonna be some little things to iron out, but when you try to make 2 separate trainings required, 2 different subgroups of staff, every now and then people are gonna be in the wrong coding. So much thank you to our professional development department. We've been very gracious in helping us facilitate a lot of the questions that we received. I'll give you, my mother was a school teacher for since 1970. She taught 35 years, and she's a substitute. She hates taking those trainings. And she called me and said, I just took a really good training this year. I was hoping she was going to say diversity awareness. And I said, really, what was it? She said diversity training. I actually learned something. So we know this is not going to be a rush to make everything utopian. However, this is an opportunity that we can say that all of our staff members have exposure to it. The last component of it, the committee recommended exploring opportunities to provide diversity, awareness, sensitivity, and connected training for our students. Crystal and I are working on that. In fact, she has a mentoring group that she's working with Paul on some of our middle school for. And we're going to experiment with Lehigh Senior High School, with one of their classes, through social emotional learning. So if you notice the mental health plan, a lot of the conversation is connected to social and emotional learning for our students. We're now formatting or leveraging diversity and inclusion professional development for our students so we can go out and provide that level of support too. So we haven't implemented it yet, but that was the feedback that we received. So we took that and we're building something very similar to our kids, our students. They need to understand their frame of references and how do we see ourselves as cultural beings. And that in turn gives us opportunity to interact with others. So that's what we're trying to do.
Mentioning a utopian word, how do you evaluate after they took this training that they actually really affected, or at least there is a change in some of the behaviors?
I think
how are you
with,
going to measure that?
With professional development, it's very hard to measure. So I can take a training, but how do I know it's a direct output of it? So I will say we can track the number of people who've taken that, but when you have training that's connected to hearts and minds, ultimately, you can measure it based on the reduction of any complaints that we receive, any OCR complaints that we receive. But if we look at the personal behavior as an individual, is a more reflection piece. Looking at best practices, we struggle to find a way to measure this one training has now contributed to this change in this individual. So there is no, doctor, if you have any recommendations, we'll greatly appreciate that. But there is no metrics that we've been able to find that's easy to say this one training has contributed to this change in this.
I just wanted to add something there that among the training that you had last year, Dr. Ivy and I had met with Matthew Kay in the social studies heads of department. We meet here, and we probably will have another one with, I don't know the date, but we meet with the social studies heads of department. We talk about psychology, sports science.
And if I may, that's why it's been a pleasure to work with this committee. The great thing about this is you all are so accomplished to offer feedback, but then also some of your knowledge and expertise. Dr. Diadui, because of his work at FGCU and being a social studies instructor, said, what can we do to make sure that we're culturally responsive in social studies curriculum, how we balance and out how we speak about populations as it relates to world history. So he and his colleague came in and they drafted a proposal and then had the proposal through the superintendent's office and then over to curriculum. And then they trained our social studies department heads. We want to just kind of give some information about the
Yeah, it was pretty good actually, and I think we followed it up. There's some, well, that time there was a bit of presentation, but we need to move on more conversations at more specific areas. And the good thing, and I do hope what I mentioned earlier on about the conference coming up, we have a big international conference coming to Sunbelt Marriott this year, which we also include, and we'll be working with Dr. Martin, with a professional development person, to get a group of teachers, specific stuff that pertain to our own. And it originated originally from our conversation here, but we want to build a group like Jared talked about, called Mister. It's a program there, and we need to train more so that they can also go and train more. So thanks.
Can you address some of the topics that you covered, Dr. Dianui?
We talked about sensitivity in language and behavior and cultures and different cultures, particularly Dr. Hassan is from the Middle East now, and originally I am from, the accent of Kenya, and, it all started with a group we meet with the spirituality called the African Network, Caribbean Middle East group, we talk about what specific aspect affect our students, what matters, what, it's interesting. Yeah.
To indirectly answer your question about the progress that these trainings take, we did talk last year about doing a student survey of their opinions and their feelings on diversity and inequity in the schools. And so since the teachers are taking these new trainings, indirectly the students would have there'd be impact on the students, hopefully. And so we can bring that idea up and kind of work on it more to include that as part of it to see if these trainings are having an impact on the students. We can't necessarily judge what the teachers are doing, like you said, within their own hearts and minds, but that will come out in their actions, and interactions with the students. That's a possibility to try to see what's happening.
So does the teacher contract allow us to actually measure certain metrics? So how many referrals they make to the principal?
So, the way the teacher evaluation is structured now is basically with bargaining with our labor union, TAL. Right now, teachers are evaluated based on the Danielson model. So there's certain areas or components that are in there. There is not in metrics a part of the evaluation that explicitly states the number of referrals. However, there's data conversations. So you as an administrator, you have the full right to pull the data for specific teachers and notice, I'm noticing that XYZ groups of kids are being suspended or being removed from their class at a certain level. Can we have a conversation about it? So there are ways that it could be connected to evaluation, but the way it currently stands now, Sean, there is no explicit reference to referrals connected to the evaluation for teachers.
But we do have a department within the district that is monitoring that.
Right.
Now, it's new, so they are monitoring the suspension rates and everything else pertaining to that child.
So that data check conversation that rolls down from the district, sees what's happening on the school level, and having a conversation with that administrator, and that administrator is now having a conversation with those teachers.
And we can sort of say, this is how it was last year.
Correct.
And because of this training, it's gone down 20%.
Right.
Or these types of infractions have changed a certain. So we can measure certain things. And we're not precluded from doing that in our contract with the town. So
It depends on how you define measure.
Right.
So, and I'll lean over to a retired principal here, but the way that evaluations work for teachers, there are components related to the manager grading, so how the manager or the administrator rates that individual teacher. And the other component is the value added model, or MAM, and that's based on student scores. So the way the overall evaluation is pretty tight. However, what administrators have the flexibility of being able to do based on classroom walkthroughs and evaluations, they notice that there's some impropriety going on, they can have those conversations with teachers and they can rate them effective, highly effective, needs improvement, et cetera. But there are three components, really two major components, the manager rating and student value added model that really determine if a teacher is overall effective or highly effective. That's what I'm saying.
and I don't want to measure them in their effectiveness as a teacher, as an instructor, because this can, but that can get into really gray areas. But we can measure outcomes of referrals for this type of action or inaction. We can look at metadata for schools that are maybe more hotspots than others. Okay.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so not necessarily a question, but I kind of just wanted to chime in on the conversation about kind of measuring or determining whether or not these trainings are working for teachers. I can say for me personally, being in the classroom, I took the diversity training online. I also went to the training at Lehigh. I felt like it was amazing. I think it was a great first step to kind of becoming diversified or including that diversity training in the classrooms. For me, when I noticed with my school in particular, that the culture of the school is changing. So when it's kind of like determining whether or not it's working, and then you mentioned discipline, which I think is like a very key thing. One thing that my school does in particular, we talk about the percentage of students who are like disciplined, suspended, things like that. And then you see the percentage of certain subgroups, the minority children. Last year, the numbers were astronomical. And as we've been having our meetings kind of like bi-weekly, our principal is showing us that information. We see that with the African American subgroups, the Latino subgroups, the number of suspensions and referrals for those students, they are decreasing. And I just feel like it's because more teachers are becoming aware of, or they're becoming more culturally aware, I should say. So I definitely feel like it's working. Thank
Mr. Sarlet, I know in public comment, you want to interject in there too also. I know you have, I'm making sure that I'm not the only person talking from the school though. So I know in public comment, you can have, if you want to say something and add to that conversation.
I think we kind of answered it. I'm dealing with discipline now with the students. The school I'm at now, they hired me because the high referral rate, and one of the things the principal told me that a lot of our black males are the ones getting suspended or the ones that have a high rate of absenteeism and things like that. So when they brought me on board, they asked my input on what we could do different. And one of the things I told them now is building a relationship. So what I've been doing now is building relationships with our kids here, and compared to the first 4 weeks of last year to this year, the referral rate has decreased by at least 90 so far. I think we might have had 5 or 6 so far, but compared to what is it, like 96? Compared to last year's, this is 4 weeks in. So things are changing, and I did see the training. I had to take it myself, and I want to say I've used some of those strategies, but not so much of the video, but if I wasn't aware of those things, I would have used those strategies already, but the video definitely helped. I was surprised to see it on there. I was like, oh, well, what is this? Compared to looking at the asbestos and the change blood, learning pathogens and things like that. So,
Is the training being revamped every year, so that's refreshed?
So we have an opportunity to look at it. With the Safe Schools contract, we do have an opportunity to kind of look for this.
Is there any component of the training program that deals with the topic of religious discrimination?
There was a segment, and I believe it was the staff to student, that had a scenario that played out with the cafeteria worker having a conversation with the student, and there was some miscues connected to the student's religious background.
But there's no particular education about anyone's religion?
No.
Or problems with?
No, not in that training
being
specifically. No, not in that training.
And components to the training that we're building out, we actually are leveraging is our first step. We are working on a cultural competency type where we get more into gender identity, gender expression, race, ethnicity, nationality, and different components and bias, assumptions, having those conversations. Because we build a foundational component with the cultural frames of reference, what is cultural diversity and inclusion. So we have that groundwork, but as we're building out, we're actually developing action plans at the school level and also at the classroom level on how to develop those cultural understandings and competencies and inclusiveness in the classroom setting. So as we're building out components in regards to your question, we are looking at those pieces in our conversations.
So we're very early. If you notice the picture with Crystal and Dr. Nathan Shaker and Crystal that's all of them our middle school. They're serving as our pilot school for the continuum of the 3-tier approach to the training. The first one is leveraging diversity and inclusion. The next step would be cultural competency. So we'll go back to them in October. We'll go back to December. We'll go back to them in December and then talk about some of these terminologies. Do I understand race, ethnicity, national origin? Do I understand all those components related to the terminology and diversity? Then toward the goal of, as a teacher, as a school, what is my individual diversity and inclusion plan look like? So, as alluded to by our chair, our past chair, in less than 2 years, we're still growing. That's why you guys are helpful to us and give us some of the cues connected to religion. That's why I wanted Dr. Diadui to kind of touch on that. And the training he provided to the social studies teachers, that was a part of it. That was a part of the conversation.
It came up because somebody in the school district, as a teacher, she meant well, but she just told the Muslim students, like, you know, you are religious, whatever. And then when it came up, she told me it became bigger than really it was, like it was a bad statement, it was a mistake, it was directly then we felt some cultural relevance training. That's how very bad what she said, it was like, I think a joke, it was not a joke, not a joke.
Right.
That cultural relevance, those kind of things.
That's why I was trying to get you to kind of talk about the components of it.
But everyone gets that so much detail, but that's those kind of things.
We took that approach to make sure religion was in that, because we know a lot of these cultural conversations as it relates to religious groups, ethnicity, and nationalities occur in some of our social studies classes. So how can I make sure that our social studies department chairs are equipped, and that's why Dr. Dianui and Dr. Hassan was so important, because that was what they provided. And now moving forward with our social studies coordinator. So to your point.
For the good of the, what time are we supposed to?
Yeah,
we're done.
We're almost there, we're almost there.
One thing, in addition
All right.
Because it used to be 7:30.
Yeah, it's usually 7:30. So I want to give everyone some dates for upcoming meetings, have the next 5 meeting dates. So let's approve those. It's not in your packet, I'm gonna tell you the dates. This time I said she would send them out to everyone. But for approval purposes, we have October 14th, November 11th, January 13th, February 10th, and March 9th.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the 11th might be Veterans Day. So the committee will have to decide if they keep that usual meeting rotation, select an alternative meeting for the month of November. If you all keep this rotation that's been provided.
So you want to make a motion to change the November meeting to a non-holiday?
I move that we change the November 11th meeting to November 4th, 2019, which would be the first Monday of November instead of the second Monday of November.
Yes.
Just to make sure we have it on that particular day.
So we'll check second.
Second.
So we're gonna check and make sure that this room is available for that date.
If the committee passes the motion, we will work with the November 4th date, and if by chance the room is not available, there's no space available, we'll cycle back to the committee and the chair to make a decision as to alternative date.
All right. So is there a motion to approve the dates as listed?
We choose what, November 4th? Because
Yes, November 11th will be moved to November 4th,
If space is
if
available.
space is available. If not, we'll bring it up again in our October meeting, pick a different day.
So moved.
Second? Second. And the motion is carried.
make a motion to adjourn.
There's one thing, Mr. Chairman and committee, for your consideration. As shared by immediate past chairman, Dr. Minaya, every year the committee is asked to look at the district student assignment plan. In his overview as to how EDAC was established, EDAC was established to have an oversight over student enrollment as well as locations of new schools to make sure that we're honoring our desegregation and unitary status. So with that being said, the student enrollment office would like to present, if the board is willing, for you all to have a conversation with them in the month of October, well in advance of them taking it before the school board. So last year, the committee wanted to make sure they got the presentations on time to review it, so they didn't feel like they were rushed. So I did ask them to hold the month of October, if you all adopt that as a presentation.
May I make the move that we come in October?
I'll second that.
Because that was the most important item remaining.
Are there any additional topics you'd like to see upcoming for October, future meetings?
I'd like to hear an update, maybe at our November meeting, about our successful hiring of minority educators.
Okay.
I would propose for that you can have Dr. Atkins give an overview of all that if he's available or his assistant, something like that.
Or Dr. Corrett or someone ready to
For
identify
November?
the intentional natures and how those are growing.
And that's for November?
Yeah. We can have Dr. Atkins or Dr. Corrett too.
Can I, there's a
Yes.
motion on the floor, so I'm not going to speak without the motion. Will you indulge me for a second?
Yes.
Last year, the superintendent came and had conversation as related to hiring and recruitment, right there before. I think that's what Dr. related to. He did come to the committee and talk.
And you can talk about the vision, the overall vision as pertains to that. Let's leave it like that for now, and we can invite the others later on when we get to know each other better. All right.
Is there a motion to approve those items to be presented?
So moved.
So, thank you.
And the next motion.
Yes, is anything else for good order? All right, is there a motion to adjourn? Yes. Thank you, everyone.